I'm Justin. I'm a Skullcom librarian. My pronouns are he and they.
I'm Sadie. I work IT at a public library, and my pronouns are they, them.
And I'm Jay. I'm a music library director, and my pronouns are he, him.
And we have guests. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Sure thing. My name is Chrys, and I am product lead at Invest in Open Infrastructure.
And I am Lauren, and I work in engagement at Invest in Open Infrastructure, and my pronouns are she or they.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for reaching out. I have some experience with Invest in Open, particularly the Infra Finder, but always interested to learn more. And I'm sure other people are interested too, because, it's open source stuff related to libraries. I think we've got a perfect audience for that.
Yeah, we're really glad to be here.
Yep.
Sorry, we did the opening and then I immediately started having connection problems. I need to refresh real quick.
Oh, no problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Arthur is deciding that he's wanting a lot of attention right now.
Of course.
Like I'm getting the behind the scenes here.
He likes to be in meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Can't guarantee I won't also be visited by a cat.
Yeah. You want to be on the podcast, Arthur?
I just realized after all of our introductions, I forgot to say pronouns.
Oh, that's fine. Not everybody does. It's usually not a problem for us to carry on while someone restarts, but I just want to make sure in case I have to restart the call.
Of course.
Yeah. Arthur, stop putting your butt on my webcam with guests.
Classic.
It's a privacy blocker.
He's like stuck under my microphone. There you go, buddy.
Looks better.
Okay.
Yeah, it looks a lot better.
Okay. Should be good now. Sorry about that.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's good. I was waiting just to make sure I didn't have to restart the call or whatever. All right. So I guess for people who aren't aware of IOI, what is it? What's it all about? What's the mission?
Yeah, well, we're a nonprofit initiative working to increase the investment in and adoption of open infrastructure to further equitable access to and participation in research. It's a mouthful. And we do this, we have 3 core programs through which we do this. I can tell you a little bit more about them. One is research-driven funding pilots, and these ensure that we have a healthy, resilient, sustainable future for research and scholarship. Another is strategic support, where IOI collaborates closely with infrastructure providers, funders, and institutions to build resilience and sustainability in the knowledge sector. And the last is our data room work, where we provide actionable, practical tools and recommendations to support decision makers in adopting and investing in open infrastructure.
And that would be something like Infra Finder.
That's right.
Okay. I guess I'm interested, how did IOI begin, if you want to give us the history on it?
Yeah. Lauren, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I can talk about that a little bit. So IOI was started out of a longstanding collaboration. And it was basically, and you'll forgive me, am I back?
Yes.
Oh, I'm so sorry. My connection froze. Chrys, can you take
Oh, yeah. This is one of those things where, because Lauren and I joined very recently, and we were just thrown into the deep end, we didn't get a lot of inculcation into the history of IOI. So it's a little, so this is one of those questions where we need to do a little bit more homework in order to answer this in a very succinct way.
I can actually do it now that my connection is back. So
okay.
I will just do it right now, and I'll give it a pause. So Invest in Open Infrastructure came out of a conference called the Joint Roadmap for Open Science Tools, JROST. And that was started in 2018, I think. And that event brought a lot of folks together from a lot of different organizations, institutional leaders, publishers, funders, software developers. And that organization went on for a few years, and IOI was born out of that. And for a while, it was a volunteer effort. It was a group of people just doing volunteer work to kind of figure out the space and understand what was going on. But then in 2019, it was more formalized. And then our first executive director, Caitlin Thaney, was hired in March 2020. And so that's how we got our start. And we've been going and doing this work ever since.
Okay. Yeah, it wasn't, for some reason, I thought IOI had been around a little bit longer than that, but I guess that's around when I first started hearing about it. Would have been right around the time I moved into my current job.
Yeah, and the folks working at IOI have all been around and working in this sector too and doing various projects. So, but yes, it's about 2019, 2020 that it was formalized as an organization.
Right. So as an organization, what makes IOI different than a lot of the other projects that we have going on, they're all focused on different things. So there's lots of different approaches to making open infrastructure, like ORCIDs work or making RORs work and stuff like that. So where does IOI fit into that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So the interesting thing to me about IOI is that we sit at this intersection of a number of different communities that all come together. So that includes, as I mentioned, those folks who were involved in that original JROST conference. So these are, funding bodies, infrastructure service creators and providers and workers, and the research community and librarians. And all of these folks came together at this original conference and continued to work with us, really gelled around this belief that in the shared digital infrastructure, that is the critical key point to accelerating open science. And one of the really cool things about this team is all of our folks come from different backgrounds. So you've got Chrys and me on this call, and we couldn't, I think, have much more different backgrounds to how we came to IOI. And because of that, we get these different viewpoints and different connection places into the world of open infrastructure. And because of that, we're situated in a way that we can try different things and have different conversations with different folks that maybe other organizations, they can do really deeply in one space, and we can reach across borders there. So some of the perspectives that we often engage with are in journalism and public-private partnership spaces, and of course the open science community. It's a really fun team to be part of.
The journalism partnerships, is that similar to like the public library publishing local papers thing I heard about recently, or is that something else?
The journalism aspect comes from our executive director's background. She worked for a long time in journalism, got her start there, in fact, I believe, and has many connections in that space. And Chrys, you also did a stint working with the New York Times, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, for me, I think one of the things that was interesting to me about being at IOI is that I've always been interested in helping people at scale. And I did, as Lauren mentioned, I did work in news. I also did developer advocacy and product management. I come from an industry background, so working with libraries. I've been a consumer, I guess. Is that the right word? I've been a patron
User.
of libraries. Yeah, I've been a user of libraries, but haven't worked within libraries. But I have worked at companies like the New York Times, O'Reilly Media, and GitHub. I also co-founded two organizations. One was Hacks Hackers and another called Write Speak Code. And that brings people together at the intersection of technology and greater purpose. Yeah. So that said, open source and open data have always been important to my work and the work of the communities that I'm a part of. And finding ways to ensure that we have infrastructure that makes that access possible is important to me. So that's why I came and joined IOI.
Yeah. Is there anything else about your background you wanted to add before I ask Lauren about?
Oh,
since we kind of accidentally segued into the
sorry.
background question. It's fine.
Sorry. No,
Segues are good.
Yeah. That's kind of me in a nutshell.
Okay. Lauren, how'd you get into IOI?
Well, I come out of the library world, so I have a long winding road. It started with music education. I went through a PhD in linguistics, right when academia was going into the slide down to the contract crisis and no jobs. And I worked for 10 years in a large R1 academic library in scholarly communication space and in library publishing. And that gave me a huge insight into all of the various permutations of issues with closed infrastructures. And the longer I worked in that space, the more it became really evident that we need to work across organizations and across different stakeholder groups and across different kinds of organizations as well in order to really affect change. And IOI was perfectly situated for doing that kind of work.
How did the opportunity just arrive? You're going along in library land. Why move into IOI?
Yeah, so for me, I'd kind of hit a spot where I had been in my job for about 10 years, and it was either continue doing what I was doing or go into administration or go to another library in a different place to do something slightly different. And I was more interested at that point in expanding my scope and seeing what I could do for other organizations with the things I had learned through my time at the library. I was also ready for something a little bit different. So, it's nice to have a fully remote work job, for example. I didn't exactly have that in my library. library position. But yeah, I just, kept my eyes open. I was kind of helping a student search for a job, and I saw this job pop up in my feed, and I was like, wait a minute, I could do this. Is the most fun part about my
Stole
current
a
library
job from a student.
Don't tell him.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
I'm always curious how people like move around and because like the career pathways everyone takes in libraries are always so different. It's hard to give anyone career advice at all. So I think just hearing what people end up doing is useful enough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing. There's a lot of folks, I think for a time there were a lot of folks with like PhDs or from like the sort of disciplinary academia doing work in libraries, whether that was through like digital humanities or data management kind of work or scholarly communication, like for me. And so that I was part of kind of that group of folks who didn't have a formal library background, coming and working in libraries and having to learn so much from the folks around me. So it's been interesting to be one of those folks in this space. And then it's even more interesting now to go from being a librarian to being like in this nonprofit, like open source space where sometimes the roles of librarians are not exactly well understood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely, especially when you have a mixture of infrastructure, the library software marketplace, and then like in an open source world, those things don't mesh together easily. We were talking about the British library hack in the Discord, and it was like how many systems could possibly have failed and to be quarantined and didn't, right? Because it was a mishmash of 1,000 different products.
Yeah, it's one of the challenges of just like operating in the world today is everything. It's all kinds of like bananas plumbing and spaghetti that's been put together with like what's the word, like wires and duct tape. And when things go wrong, it's really hard to suss out exactly like where pinpoint where all the issues are. So yeah, challenge.
Mm-hmm. I know you have an ongoing project investigating reasonable cost for public access to U.S. federally funded research and scientific data. So what's the purpose of that project? Because I'm guessing it's saying we're spending too much money in one area, we need to reallocate it in another.
So yeah, sort of. So the genesis of that project, so I'm actually on the project team for this, so I can talk over Chrys a little bit here. But so the genesis of that project was probably our team had the same reaction that I think a lot of folks did when we were reading the Nelson memo when it came out. This is the 2022 memo from the Office of Science and Technology Policy that mandated new guidelines for open sharing of the outputs of federally funded research, right? So for me, as I was reading this, I came to this phrase that just, kind of made my eyes bug out a little bit, which was reasonable costs, where this memo basically says that like the federal agencies should allow, it says something like, should allow researchers to include reasonable publication costs. And I was like, reasonable? Like, what does that mean? And I know a lot of my library colleagues and friends had kind of the same reaction. Like, what does that actually mean? So this project was born from just that phrase. Like, what does that actually mean? And what does it look like in practice to try to figure that out as a repository that might be hosting open research data, as a researcher trying to figure out like where I can publish and how much money I need to budget for that, and what is reasonable and what does costs even mean? So so it's kind of a multi-stage process, and we just released the very first part of this at the end of February. Yay, a publication. And this publication basically covered like what it does reasonable cost there. So there are these four terms. There's reasonable, allowable, cost, and price that people just seem to use somewhat interchangeably without really getting down to what those things actually mean underneath. And so we looked at the work of making research data publicly available in this first publication and looked at, okay, so how much does that cost? That is, what are the like resources, money, labor that makes that work available, that data available, like what you actually have to spend. And then what are the prices? So these are the prices that services might charge for doing that work. And obviously, like cost and price are not the same thing, right? The price might include extra markup for, supporting other programs that the organization might do. It might include, maybe some long-term preservation costs. It might include some other things. It might include profit if it's a for-profit or corporate publisher as well. So we looked at the difference between cost and price. And if I've learned anything from this project, it's just to be very careful about how I use those terms in like every part of my life now. But it also looked at what does reasonable mean. And it turns out, of course, the government has a definition for what reasonable means. We actually found a reference to this in like the Code of Federal Regulations. And so we outlined that. And that definition is really funny. I have it written here. Reasonable if it does not exceed that which would be incurred by a prudent person under the circumstances prevailing at the time the decision was made to incur the cost.
And then what does prudent mean?
Right. So you could go down this slope forever. Okay, what does prudent mean? Okay, what are the circumstances prevailing? Okay, what is this? What is this? So you could really go down this rabbit hole forever. But that is what they mean when they say reasonable. So this first white paper is laying out these 4 kind of definitions and then exploring, okay, so what are the actual costs being reported by repositories and what are the prices that they're charging, and kind of looking into the literature and the available information on that. So that was like the first step. And now we're right now we're actively working with representatives from several different institutions. We're aiming for 30 different institutions from across the spectrum of different kinds of universities. And we're working with them to understand, okay, so given these definitions, how are you responding to this locally? What kind of guidance are you giving to your researchers? Where are you getting your information from? Who are you collaborating with on campus? What do you need? What do you wish you had? What are your workflows like? Is there one person doing all of this? Is it like going back and forth between offices? What does that even look like? And trying to compare across institutions to help us share knowledge. So that's the next part. We're actively working on that right now. So the only interesting thing to report from that is experiences differ wildly. So we're looking forward to releasing that later this year. So that's the overview of the Reasonable Cost Project. Does it seem reasonable to you?
Yeah, although it's like how much of this is trying to find guidance for, I guess, research offices that are dealing with the grants, and how much of it is, I guess, focused on how different infrastructure could be built instead of spent externally?
Oh, great question. So for the work that we're doing right now, it's really about the current landscape. So what exists out there right now? What are the costs involved? What are the prices involved? What are people actually being told to do by their institutions or their societies or their publishers or whatever? Trying to get a handle on that so that we can understand what we're working with right now, so that then hopefully the next step will be identifying maybe some points where something is really needed, something's missing, something could be put together better, and going from there and building out. But right now it's really just about like, what is the situation? What are folks doing? What is the response looking like? And trying to get some ideas, see if we can see some patterns and places to collaborate.
Okay. Is that the landscape analysis that's coming out soon?
So we've just released the first landscape view of the research data public availability part of our study. So we just did that in February. You'll see another one about article publications later this year. And then we'll have another one that is the outcome of the discussions with institutions and different organizations about their workflows and how they are guiding people and what that looks like.
Okay. Yeah, I knew there was something coming out and that it was going to come out after we did the episode. So I wasn't sure like if there was like a separate landscape analysis altogether that I was missing.
Yeah.
Yes, you are hinting at our State of Open Infrastructure report, which is a separate project that's coming out in a month or so after this episode.
Okay. Well, we'll get to that in a second, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a report that came out, was it the Australian Institute, which I thought might be relevant because it's more looking at what are the costs in terms of educational spending. How much are they spending on subscriptions, one-time access, and article processing charges, and how much of that is grant money? And then so they come to some recommendations to change how their funding is done. So they want to incentivize publishing in cheaper open access journals, which I don't know how much pressure that's really going to put on anyone, because everyone still wants to publish in Nature.
And it's not cheap to publish in Nature, that's for sure.
Right. Trialing a lottery-based system for the allocation of grants, which is to make it more equitable so that it's not a hyper-publishing thing. I mean, some of these I agree with, which is, kind of doing anything to pull away from the publish, grant, and then you get issues like hyper publishing and like quicker turnaround times. I just did a whole presentation about this at my university for the School of Medicine, where all of these knock-on issues that come about because the incentives are focused on how much do you publish, how good of a journal is it, and then that creates quality issues for the journal because then the journal needs to get their turnaround time better. There are enough peer reviewers. It causes all kinds of problems. So pulling off the gas on that in any way, I think, is a good idea for funding bodies to do, just so science has time to happen.
Yeah.
It's a big part of it. So you're not salami slicing all your research into a dozen papers or generating it with AI and publishing that.
Absolutely. It reminds me of the statement that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation also released, where they have a new open access policy or a new variation of it that basically they're stopping their support for article processing charges and encouraging or maybe mandating the use of preprints and preprint review processes. So I think there's this kind of interest in this Australia example that you have, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It looks like there's an interesting push going on here from different funders.
Yeah, I think it was really after Plan S didn't do what it was. They realized throwing money at a problem wouldn't really fix it. So now they're trying to do something a little more nuanced rather than just pumping in a huge amount of money, maybe less amount of money and then more conditions on the money, stuff like that.
Yeah, a little bit more guidance and less just being willing to pay anything with the means justifying the end, I suppose.
Yeah. All right. Lost my notes because I opened up like 20 tabs.
The bane of our existence.
I'm just trying not to close the recording because if I close it, there's a good chance
We all
it'll
die.
crash.
Oh no.
We all cease to exist. We only live in this digital space.
That's right. Yeah.
JC, did you have anything about that first project?
Not particularly. Scholarly communications. I'm a copyright nerd, but other than that, it gets into the weeds of like some of the more intricacies. And I'm like, I peer reviewed one time and I was like, sure, I think I did this right. And I haven't published anything since 2017. So
Yeah, and as a
I've escaped.
As a complete non-academic, the word infrastructure, I think, has a very different connotation to me. I'm thinking like networks and
Same.
Yeah.
and
Same.
I'm thinking like
computer
ILSs.
yeah, like, well, and even beyond like systems, but like, physical infrastructure that supports digital stuff. So for a complete layman's term sort of way, how are you guys defining infrastructure within like your own workspace, like work group?
Yeah. We actually came up with a definition that I'm looking up right now because it's late and I can't remember things. Hang on.
You don't have to worry about silences. I automatically cut them.
Oh, okay.
Take as long as you need.
Thank you.
I guess while you're looking,
Okay.
I'll just say, oh, sorry. Yeah, you go ahead. You found it. Just as I say that was the ticket.
Yeah. Well, so we view open infrastructure as a spectrum, and rather than thinking of it as like a binary kind of thing. And we're currently, our current working definition for open infrastructure is services that meet one of several criteria. They either meet the definition of open source software. They primarily or exclusively distribute openly licensed or open access content. It's free to use by anyone, or either free of charge or other restrictions. It's community governed and it's transparent in its operations and finances, and it's operated by a nonprofit or non-commercial entity. And again, for IOI, we're primarily looking at the academic and scholarly research space.
So it has to also be, so we tend to think of open infrastructure as something digital, right? Less of the like hardware, the physical world, although those are certainly important components that make all of this stuff possible. But in order for us to like possibly have a scope that we can work within, we tend to think of the like digital infrastructure. And yeah, to scope it in, it's, those academic ecosystems to do research, to perform a function related to research. And this is everything from, publish the platform that article is published on to like the plumbing infrastructure that like delivers you the metrics of like downloads and views and like all of these things to, data analysis software, all kinds of things fit into this big tent of infrastructure that we think about.
Yeah, like as so I'm a library director, by which I mean I'm the only librarian. Like I'm not some highfalutin like super admin. I'm just the only librarian. I'm at a very small institution, and I've been running into this because it's like I don't have a huge budget, but there are things that I want/need, especially as like my university or my college like wants more digital stuff, but they aren't giving me the money to do it. But our RT is one guy and doesn't like to use open source stuff because he can't necessarily maintain and support it on his own because it doesn't come with tech support. And so I've been in this like tug of war being like, I can get archive space operating on my laptop right now. Just put it on a server and I'll do it. Like, or like, do I just buy hosting for it? Like, because if I go through Lyricist or some shit, like it's $1 million. If I do Reclaim hosting, I could lie and get a single one and say it's not for an institution and then put it on there against the wills of my IT guy. Like, like it's this sort of like, okay, I can use all the open source, open infrastructure I want. But then if like hosting or like if my IT just says no, then I don't understand what I'm supposed to do,
Yeah, that comes up a lot. And
yeah.
That is something that we hear over and over again as we're doing these various projects. So actually, it's going to be a piece of the State of Open Infrastructure report that's going to come out in a little while. So we have a whole section on procurement and IT governance, which I just recently got the chance to like review and read a preview of. And it is a whole mess. It's not just you, it's not just this particular permutation of this problem. Like everywhere we hear about procurement processes being kind of not favorable to open infrastructure, even at organizations that say that they support open infrastructure and have a goal and stated mission to do open science and all of these things, they still like have trouble with their procurement processes.
Whereas all these vendors, EBSCO only uses open source infrastructure. Only. Everything that EBSCO has is open source. Folio is open source. And like you could just go fucking get Folio. But no one wants to. And so we pay Bywater or Lyricist or EBSCO $1 million for all of the stuff that is open source. So it's like when we say, oh, we don't procure open source, we actually are. We're just paying other people to do it for us.
Yeah.
And we could just do it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's another interesting strategy that's come up in this space too, is where like open infrastructure, open software, open source services will actually either spin up their own vendors so that there is an entity for these procurement folks to talk to and to like put responsibility on, or they will be like cultivating like a community of vendors who are, they're participating in the community or they're giving back code or, whatever it is, in order to direct people to these like kind of trusted third parties that can like kind of help them get over that bias in the procurement process where they like kind of need this like vendor money exchanging hands for goods and services thing in order to understand what it means to have a software service. So this is a whole cool part of this upcoming report that I've just given you a little preview of, so you can keep your eyes out for that.
I cannot wait because I just want to be like, read it.
Jay, may I ask a naive question as a person who doesn't, who's coming from outside this space?
No naive, no such thing as a bad question. I also do instruction.
Oh. Thank you. Yeah, so you mentioned earlier that there are, open tool or open source tools like EBSCO and Folio. Like, but you can't get access to them. How come?
So there's a lot of library software that is free and open source, including our integrated library systems like Folio, Koha, some of the discovery systems like Blacklight, the archive software like Archive Space. There's an alternative to LibGuides called Subjects Plus. There's a lot of this stuff that is technically open source, and you can still get it for free, but because it can be sometimes complicated, or Omeka, for example, is a great great example of something that's free and open source. You can just do it. Justin, shut up.
Took like 3 months for us to get Omeka running.
Oh,
It should
Yeah.
take 3 minutes.
yeah. If you do Reclaim hosting on a what is it? There's Reclaim hosting has this one like install inator thing for cPanel where you just go, I want Omeka S. Thank you very much. Boop. And then you get it, and then you don't have to fuck around with it. So all of this stuff, it often requires, it can be kind of 6 different things in a trench coat. Like, so it's like archive space, for example, required me to get MySQL on my laptop as well as Solr on my laptop. And I knew I had to have the knowledge to know how to use a command line and VS Code, and like knew what all of that meant and how to follow instructions to get that to work. Most of the stuff requires being on a server somewhere. It's not just on I got Opener fine. I got MarkEdit. Like I got all of these on my computer. I didn't have to talk to my IT guy about that. Zotero, great, love it. But then all of these other more like library digital infrastructure things that are free but require some being like are kind of complex or need to be put on a server somewhere. And a lot of libraries don't want to do that. And also, like, if you do it yourself, you don't get tech support, and you have to like go and do like GitHub issues and like read those and care about those, right? Whereas if you pay Bywater for Koha, they provide the tech support and hosting for you, that kind of thing. So that's sort of where these are free, but it's whether or not your library or IT is willing to put something on a server for you or pay for cloud like hosting for an external cloud server or something, which is still a physical server, just someone else has it, right?
Yeah.
But did that answer your question?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's interesting. Sorry, Sadie, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say, is coming from an IT person, like even IT is pivoting a lot to cloud services and moving away from hosting our own servers. So like you mentioned Bywater, like one of my previous libraries purchased the discovery layer that Bywater sells. No, I forget what it was called. It was a couple of years ago. But they had an on-prem option, but it was like their third tier option. So a lot of these vendors are also like cloud hosting or that sort of thing. So it's even getting harder and harder for IT to host our own stuff. And that just sort of trickles down to like Jay's situation.
You can't even host Easy Proxy anymore. Like if you used to host Easy Proxy yourself, you still can, but you can't, like that's not an option anymore when you get Easy Proxy.
Yep.
Only OCLC. Yeah.
They hate that we're still self-hosting it.
Yeah.
So
I don't want to support it.
Yeah, there's I imagine you guys probably have been running into this a lot. The supply chain complexity is probably just off the charts. Just trying to navigate that as an IT department is kind of insane and not what I was like expecting to have to deal with in a lot of ways. So yeah.
Yeah, what you're talking about, we heard about so much. And for me, coming into IOI to figure out how to create, like, make it easier to evaluate and adopt open infrastructure. I was hearing a lot of these like incredibly like excruciating and painful stories, and we started talking with providers, and over the course of development of Infra Finder, and we were talking both like with the librarian and research folks, and also with providers, and just being like, okay, here's a bunch of complexity on the adoption side, and how do we talk with providers to get them thinking about and able to give us data about things like what you're talking about. Is this thing free? What does free mean? Is it hosted? What does hosted mean? Do you have solutions vendors? How does that work? And how can we then turn it into structured data to that would enable us to create a product that is going to help adopters and potentially funders as well understand like what's out there. Are there intersections, some kind of intersections between different tools and services in this space, and that fundamental like local question of if you're at an institution, one of the themes we heard is like, does the thing that I'm looking to get plug into my existing situation easily, right? And like trying to figure out how to ask that question and get data in a way that made it really easy for people to then figure that out. turned out to be really hard. We're still working on refining how we do that. So yeah, this conversation we're having right now, I'm just like, oh, like validation, but also, oh my gosh.
And you could tell what I was working on at work today. I'm like, oh, I just need to get it set up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I pulled the same trick Jay's doing with Archive Space. Is I did the same thing, and I installed Omeka on my computer, and I said, look, it's not that hard. But yeah, it did take us like 3 months to get it set up because IT had to figure out, well, who owns this project now? And they have like 3 or 5 departments within IT, and no one wants to do it. So then they had to wrangle them all into the same room, and then I had to watch them bounce the responsibility off of each other for 3 months because I had to go to these meetings. So I did see some very impressive project management though. So I really respect a skilled project manager now because the way they like pulled teeth from everyone in the room when they had to was very impressive to me. And I was like, maybe I should do project management training. And then I looked into how much experience you need to have. And I was like, oh, never mind.
It costs $1 million to do those certifications because you have to take like tests and everything.
That's how you get certified.
But then you have to like project manage, like,
But you don't have to do any of the work. You just have to tell other people what to do. But
I think it's pretty cool. It scratches the part of my brain that puts everything in its place.
Yeah. I mean, having come from product development, an amazing project manager, a really, really strong project manager can like be the difference between just suffering a lot and getting things done. So I definitely +1 on awesome project managers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's go on to Infra Finder because I believe I was a beta tester for this. So let us know about Infra Finder. What does it do?
Yeah. Well, I guess, in a nutshell, what we're trying to do is create a tool that makes it easier to evaluate and adopt open infrastructure. When it comes time to choose something, what we were really looking for is to enable people to know what kind of options were out there. Like, people are going to choose the tool that's going to, solve their immediate problems. But one of the things that we were hearing is that not everybody kind of is aware of what's available and that there are open options available. And so what we're doing with Infra Finder is essentially like creating a first step foray into developing something that's, attractive and easy to use that helps the process of discovery and evaluation. So yeah, we wanted to, in coming up with the idea for Infra Finder, we had a whole sort of, I went through a whole sort of, what would you call it, like discovery and discovery process, doing a lot of interviews and a lot of reading, and then eventually, some initial design testing, user research focus groups, and then doing design testing as well. And Justin, I want to thank you for being a part of that.
Well, I always love to jump in when I smell an opportunity to influence the way a project is going or get a discount when it comes out. So there's always good reasons to take the time.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things from, my experience doing, product development is like, internally you might have really, really good ideas, but you don't actually know what's going to be useful to people until you talk to the people who are your end users. And Lauren worked with me on this project along with other colleagues at IOI. Lauren being, herself being a librarian and really knowing the sort of what we call the provider space, like people who make the open infrastructure. Her input was really, her input and the care that she took in talking with the providers was really, really important. For me, thinking about the end user on the adopter side, talking with folks like you, Jason, also helped me to kind of understand, some of the questions, like getting answers to some of the questions that I had. Like in addition, I did a lot of deep dive into prior work because Infra Finder, what we're doing, others have also tried before. And so, I wanted to draw inspiration from other projects like SCOMCAT and the 400 Innovations in Scholarly Communication list. PubPub's got a Mind the Gap list of tools. And even IOI had initially done a prototype before I came on board that was called the Catalog of Open Infrastructure Services. But for me, the thing that I was really thinking a lot about is like, how can we make something that's really useful for people And, one of the things that I was hearing is, when it comes time to do figure out what's out there and do vendor evaluation, like just pulling together all the information was really time consuming. Stuff was just everywhere, right? It's really hard to kind of gather that information. It takes a lot of time. It's hard to kind of evaluate like different aspects of things and evaluate, one solution versus another. So that is, that we're trying to, in releasing Infra Finder, that's what we're trying to help you do. Just make it easier for you to find information and, compare things so that, whatever you choose, that you had, you done good due diligence.
So I've seen the tool, but I don't know if many other people have. What distinguishes Infra Finder from like a catalog? Like what's the functionality of the tool that you're trying to bring out of it?
Yeah. Well, I think the key things that we offer right now, what we're going to have is 57 different providers of open infrastructure within this tool that allow you to get information, but also compare things side by side. And I think that comparison can be really useful for people. This is one of the things that we were hearing. Another piece is that a lot of these open infrastructures don't really have like marketing budgets at all. And they don't really have an opportunity to kind of present, in a sort of succinct way, like what makes them, what are they looking to do for folks and what makes them shine? We asked a lot of questions about the technology itself. Jay, you were mentioning before, it's like you had to have solar installed and you had to, have a whole bunch of like pre-existing tooling to, or download a bunch of pre-existing tooling in order to get the thing up and running. We did ask questions about that that we got information about. A lot of the libraries and research institutions we talked to as well, they're like, we're kind of less concerned about that piece at, in the initial evaluation. And what we're really looking for is to drive forward like their own, what's the right word? Like their own like initiative, like organization-wide initiative to move toward open. And so they're thinking about things like policies, transparency, governance. And so we also pulled that information together as well. And so all of, everything from the story of like, what is this tool? What are some of the key achievements of the the organization that hosts or built this tool? What are some of the technical aspects that are like some of the technical aspects about this tool that you need to know? When it comes to participatory, like being in that open space of community participation, what does that look like? Is that a thing that is if it's applicable, what does that look like? When we're talking about governance, what is the governance model? Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And then have an opportunity to also understand a little bit about like how many full-time staff do they have on the project? What's the history of the organization itself? What are their funding needs? It's all kind of in one place. And we think that having spoken with both providers as well as adopters, we feel like this is, a good first step in helping to make it easier to understand, what the choices are that are out there and how well they meet your needs.
Yeah, I believe I might have brought this up while we were talking even, but one thing is always like, I was going to bring this up earlier, which was, I was able to get Omeka through our IT, but, when I started my job during my like presentation, I was like, my ideal would be to run the repository locally on like Haiku or Samvera. And that has many more components. It has much more processing power than a little exhibit software. It needs serious storage. It needs serious resources to actually run, which is going to drive up like actual operating costs of the university. Did you hear that anywhere else in terms of like the problems of the size of the software?
Rather than the size specifically, a big theme that came up was like, in total, right? When we look at the like holistically in total, what is this going to cost us? Everything from, just getting like doing the installation to keeping the thing maintained to, getting upgrades or new features added. That was definitely like, that theme around the costs was definitely a thing that came through really strongly. And what we discovered is that because everything is so highly variable and nuanced, there wasn't really an easy way for us to be like, hey, here's a cost calculator, bang, right? Like, not at this stage. So the best that we could do is essentially say, if you want, are the costs transparent? and then, point people to here's where you would find that information. Yeah. So, this, what we're trying to do in Infra Finder is kind of like make it easier to be like, okay, I have a set of questions. How much can I quickly understand? And if I need to have that one-on-one conversation, here, like, we provide a way for you to easily go and, get in touch with folks.
Okay. With universities focusing on their open commitments, have you seen like what's guiding a lot of that? Like what their motivations are? Did that trickle through in your discussions?
Yeah. In fact, Lauren, did as a librarian with experience in this, did you want to share what you've seen in the space?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the things that we heard specifically related to this project, there's a lot of discourse out there in the world, whether it, in the US, the policies coming down from funders, if it's like the UNESCO Open Science Declaration, if it's, a scholarly society with declaration, if it's, signing pledges like DORA or all these different things. There's a lot of sort of external pressures going on. But what I think really coalesced for me as a theme when I was talking to folks in the space was that the more of your peer institutions that are doing it, the more pressure you feel to do it. So we see this with organizations like Helios Open, right? There's a lot of this is an organization where a lot of presidents and provosts and really higher up administrators in higher ed are joining. And it's about making an institutional commitment to open research in a variety of ways. And once you start seeing that, our peer institution's president is in this group and making these commitments, what are we doing in this space? There's this really coalescing factor around just seeing others doing this and then wondering how you can keep up, how you can do something new, or what ideas you can collaborate on or borrow. That's an interesting thing that I saw when I was talking to some of the service providers for Infra Finder too, on a related theme, so I did a lot of interviews with our 57 service providers, whether that was, through Zoom or, at conferences or via email. And I heard an awful lot of folks saying, well, the POSI principles came out, the principles of open scholarly infrastructure came out. And these other organizations that I follow started doing self-assessments. So we decided to do one too. And so when there are these sort of guiding, whether they're principles or documents, and then people are starting, or the organizations that you admire are starting to get on board, they can serve as good models. And it's also a source of inspiration. That's one of the things I wanted to interject on Chrys when she was talking about Infra Finder, is that we saw from the service providers that they wanted to go into Infra Finder. And when they had a question, one of them was telling me, it's really time for us to update our code of conduct. We have an old one. It's, okay, but, we wanted to update it. And they were really excited to be able to go in and look at what others have and say, oh, that one is a good model. This one has a really good, framework that we can borrow. And so that's a source of inspiration too. And so we're kind of hoping that Infra Finder will be that sort of source for inspiration as well, whether that's to choose an open infrastructure or to build a policy or to think about, okay, what can we move towards in this space? So yeah, there's this sort of coalescing group movement that once you get enough folk doing something, then you can see other folks start to move on. So that's one of the really big themes that I heard.
Yeah. And to build on that, when I was talking with librarians and other adopters, there were several of them whose leadership within the institution were really keen on thinking of, as institutions of learning and scholarship, that it was almost to me, it was almost like this is the right thing to do, right? Openness is the right thing to do. Open access is the right thing to do. One thing that just comes to mind right now is the University of California system published, I want to say it was in 2015, the UC presidential open access policy. And this is something that kind of reaches across the entire University of California system, which is, I believe is one of the largest research university systems in the country, if not the world. And so, they are like, it's this idea of like, as a public institution, scholarship, disseminating research and scholarship as widely as possible is the right thing to do to promote knowledge and serve the people, the people of the state. And they have a rubric actually that they developed that, I'd heard a number of folks that we did focus groups with say, even if they were at institutions that, were smaller or not as well funded, that they were taking they were taking inspiration from that, like what qualifies as open for them, taking that rubric and, drawing inspiration for it when at their own institutions where their leadership was also thinking about like, open is the right thing to do. How do we think about what we need in order to make open possible where we are and create our own definition?
Yeah, it is nice that that's an effect, but it's very frustrating when you're the one who wants to be first, which is what I always want to do. Is I was like, no one's done this yet. We could do it. It's so easy. We could be the first one in like Texas to do it. And it's usually something so simple and everyone's like, oh,
No,
okay.
There's that fear of being the like first adopter and like doing something wrong or getting burned or, anything like this. That comes up a lot. It is frustrating. I was in a similar kind of position in my previous work where there were a lot of things that just seemed really possible, but we needed that like sort of extra push to get there. This is one space where I think organizations like library consortia can really have a huge effect because, I'm thinking about like, for example, we talked to the folks at PALCI and PALMI, the Pennsylvania Library Consortium and the Library Consortium of Indiana. Those acronyms have more letters in them that I can't remember the meanings for. But so these folks work together to, as two consortia, adopt haiku, right? And bring it to their members, thereby giving like their members easier access to it. And just the kind of multiplying effect of that, like the consortium did it. And so that alone sort of has this effect of saying, okay, well, if I'm, at a small institution within this consortium, I can just be like, look, my consortium decided that this is a good idea. They're providing access. And all of these other institutions in my consortium are also, involved in this. So it's kind of this multiplying effect. And I think research networks throughout the world, whether they're library consortia or scholarly societies or the other like regional networks, they could really have a multiplying effect and help this along as well in order to help, folks get going on these projects when there might be that like kind of first adopter. Of course, they have to also get over the first adopter reticence.
Fear,
but
yeah.
Yeah, I always wonder why there's not more things like Texas Digital Library to do other services like publishing. We could centralize into an organization that, the universities in your system do business with. Why not that? It's interesting. But for IT infrastructure, definitely. I mean, all of this is kind of an infrastructure issue, but and a labor issue. So again, I really don't see a difference between having it to host haiku or to have it host press books and hire some copy editors and some subject editors or something like that. So anyway, to close out, why don't we talk about the upcoming landscape analysis? So what's going to be in that? We've already talked about the procurement a little bit.
Yeah, so that's the State of Open Infrastructure report that IOI is working on. That should come out in late May, I believe. So not too long from now. It's getting closer every day. So the person at IOI that's really leading this work is Gail Steinhardt. Chrys and I both worked on little pieces of this project, but I just want to give credit where credit is due here. But in this report is a landscape analysis. And we talked about the procurement. There's also going to be some discussion of policies worldwide that are developing and how they're having an impact specifically on infrastructure development. And another big part is actually research that we are doing based on the data in Infra Finder. So one of the cool things about Infra Finder is we're making the data openly available too. So you can get access to it and do research and explore explore that as well. And we did that for this report where we looked at characteristics of the infrastructures and softwares that are in Infra Finder. We kind of looked at their age, how long they've been around, kind of where they're located geographically, as well as looking at some of the commonly mentioned funding needs, things that they got grants to do, and basically everything that we could make a chart out of in our Infra Finder data. We did it. So this is just kind of trying to do a landscape analysis on the state of open infrastructure broadly and some of the trends and big ideas that we're seeing. So of course there's the procurement in there, which is a big trend. There's also the sort of maturing of software and infrastructure, where we're seeing like changes in business models and changes in governance and expanding into different membership and all these kinds of things in there as well. And we're also, the policy part is also really interesting. We're trying to look at policy developments in various parts of the world, see if there are common themes, see how they specifically impact infrastructure. There's a lot of folks doing policy analysis, especially in the EU. We don't need to do our own, but we're really interested in how these either mention infrastructure or in some cases don't mention infrastructure at all, but merely implicate that, we need infrastructure to do this work. Where will it come from? Who will pay for it? This kind of policy. So this report is a behemoth. It's a very large report. And there will be several different pieces in there that'll all work together. And we're really excited to have it come out. And I'm really excited, especially about the Infra Finder data use.
Yeah, that's great. No, I love a good landscape analysis. I've still been using the one from Spark to onboard my graduate assistants. I just hand it to them and say, read this. You'll get an idea of what we're doing here. Because I kind of, they're going to have a job doing mostly processing, but I also want to give them an idea of if they have any projects they're interested in doing, they're students first. So I want them to try stuff if they find the work interesting. But that only happens once in a while. Most graduate assistants just kind of want to get assigned whatever they're going to do and do it. But I always keep the option open. What if you wanted to build something cool? I don't know. What if you wanted to make an exhibit? Go for it. So maybe I'll send them the State of Open Infrastructure report too and see if anyone gets any ideas.
Yeah, if you do, let us know.
Mm-hmm.
We'd love to hear from them. And this is one of the other parts of this report that we're still working on, is sort of a future view, like what we're going to be paying attention to in the next, year or so in this space, developments that we think are going to, be very interesting. One of the ones that I've been working on is talking about diamond open access and all the discourse around, no APC, no subscription, this totally free open, I just did air quotes and podcast listeners can't hear air quotes, this totally free of payment by authors or readers version of publishing that has been dubbed Diamond Open Access at some point. But there's been a lot of summits, a lot of talk, a lot of discussion of how we need to support it, and business models being talked about, and developments. And I am really personally interested to see where that goes in the next year, where all this talk will go into action and what that will mean for the infrastructures that support these kind of publishing models too. So that's one of the kind of future looking parts of the report too. Yeah, so we're still working on that part, but we'll see if we get it right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the money to support the publishing infrastructure is obviously already there because the money does support the publishing infrastructure. The question is governance, control, proliferation, profit padding, all sorts of reasons that things could be different. So, and there's also these tipping points. So once enough people try something new, we see journals flip a lot, editorial boards resign, go start a Diamond Open Access journal somewhere. Yeah. Trends can change. Sometimes fast, sometimes slow. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So if you have any things that you think we should pay attention to in the next year for trends for the state of open infrastructure, let us know. Send us a note. Be happy to hear from you.
Yeah. I want to also say that, this is true of a lot of IOI's work. We're we look to be very, very collaborative in all of the things that we do, talking with the community, really, asking questions and listening to people and then responding in kind. Infra Finder was like that as well. And one of the things that I, forgot to mention is that, one of what we aim to do with Infra Finder is ensure that it's living and growing tool. So, we're starting with 57 infrastructures, but and we're working with providers to make sure that they are constantly updating the data when there are new updates, because that's that's something we've seen that we've heard from end users of like, is this thing, like, how do we know this thing has the most current information? And we're going to be working to make sure that happens. But in addition, inviting providers to also, like, that aren't already in the tool to also come and give us data so that they can be. So again, we are also looking to hear from end users as well, librarians, like people that are listening, to give us feedback on like, how can we make this more useful for you, because that is like any endeavor that we do, whether it's the landscape analysis, further research, product building, we want to hear from people to make sure that we're creating something that like produces high value and utility for folks.
We also want to hear if folks listening do use Infra Finder for something, even if it's not the intended purpose that we stated here, to discover an open infrastructure. If you use it for something else, we want to know about it, because first of all, we want to know that people are using the tool, but we also want to know, is there another possible use case? Is there another audience that finds this information valuable? And can we work with them to see how we can improve for that as well? So if anybody listening, or folks, other hosts on this podcast, do wind up using it for something, just let us know. We'd love to hear about it.
Great. Okay. I think we're good to wrap up. Thank you both so much for coming on.
Yeah. Thank you, Justin and Jay and Sadie.
This is very cool.
Yeah. And we've got a lot of links that'll go in the notes. So be sure to go through it. And we'll promote the report on the state of open infrastructure when that comes out. So we'll post that as a follow-up.
That would be awesome. We're really excited about that one too.
Thank you again, and good night.